Hello, this is Ben Television News Roundup, a compilation of major stories in the weekend. I'm Tunde Alabi. Thank you for being part of the program today. The Prime Minister has said Britain will continue to work on its preventive strategy to stop young people from being radicalized. He said the country will also continue to play its role in humanitarian rescues of people trying to flee across the Mediterranean seas. The Prime Minister, who was represented for the first time at the Prime Minister's Questions Time on Wednesday by the Chancellor, George Osborne, was answering questions during the Prime Minister's Questions Time on Britain's role in dealing with ISIS and the Mediterranean refugee crisis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Under this government's leadership, the construction of social rented homes has fallen to a 20-year low. But since 2010, the amount of housing benefit paid to private landlords has risen by £1.5 billion. Does the Chancellor understand the connection, or would he like to come to my next advice surgery so my constituents can explain it to him?
Well, first of all, of course we're aware there is an acute housing shortage in London, which is why we need to build more homes. But I can tell the Honourable Lady this: we built more council housing in the last 5 years than in the entire 13 years of the last Labour government. And I'm very happy to come to Lewisham, where we will talk about the fact that today the claimant count is down by 25% over the year, and long-term youth unemployment is down 45% in the last year. The economic plan in Lewisham is working.
May I begin by congratulating the Right Honourable Gentleman on his appointment as First Secretary of State. It was reported this week that Talha Asmal, a 17-year-old from Dewsbury, blew himself up in an ISIL attack that killed 11 people. I'm sure the Right Honourable Gentleman will agree that we need to do everything that we can to prevent our young people from travelling to Iraq and Syria. So can he confirm whether the government now has an agreement in place with all of the airlines to raise alerts when unaccompanied minors travel to known Syrian routes, and that our police are being notified by the Turkish authorities when British citizens arrive at transit points to Syria?
Well, first of all, can I thank him for his welcome, and can I welcome the Right Honourable Gentleman to his place? I think his father would be extremely proud to see him leading for the Labour Party today. And can I say, speaking for this side of the House, we're extremely relieved to see that there's no Ben in the leadership contest opposite, but plenty of Benites. Now, when it comes to the very serious situation around ISIL, when he raises the very serious situation around ISIL, I think everyone in this House is shocked that a 17-year-old citizen of our country can become radicalised and become apparently a suicide bomber on the other side of the world. And of course, we've also got those distressing reports of the families from Bradford. So we are taking a number of steps. First of all, we want to work with schools and mosques and other community institutions to help prevent the radicalisation. There's a new statutory duty to do that. Second, we're working with the airlines, including getting in place those agreements that he talks about and providing the training at the borders to stop people travelling to countries like Syria, and indeed removing their passports if they attempt to do so. But third, and this will be an issue in this Parliament, we also need to make sure our security and intelligence services have the powers they need to track people who are trying to get back into this country, and I look forward to cross-party support on that issue.
Hilary Benn.
I'm grateful for that reply. I think the House would appreciate an update on the progress of those discussions with the airlines, and I noted that he wasn't able to respond to the question I asked about the Turkish authorities, because it's a very serious matter and we need to know where things have got to. Now, we know that for some time there has been a growing number of young people being groomed to travel to Syria and Iraq. Last November, the Intelligence and Security Committee criticised the government for not giving the PREVENT programme sufficient priority and concluded, and I quote, that counter-radicalisation programmes are not working. Why does he think this is?
Well, frankly, I don't accept all of those conclusions, and there's been a disagreement about the PREVENT programme. But frankly, I think in the past, there was a confusion between the programmes that supported integration and the programmes that tried to prevent radical extremism. And as a result, certain organisations got money that should never have got public money under the last government. So the PREVENT programme is doing its work. But we have passed a very important law in this Parliament that now ensures there is a statutory duty on these public authorities, like schools, like universities, like the police, to develop the PREVENT strategy and the counter-radicalisation strategy, because where I think we agree, and let's, after all, on an issue like this, try and find areas where we agree is we need to do more in these communities to prevent this radicalisation taking place in the first place.
Hilary Benn.
Can I assure the right honourable gentleman that he will, of course, have the full support of this side of the House in measures that are taken to try and deal with this problem? But can he assure us that community-led PREVENT programmes are now actually being implemented in places like Dewsbury and elsewhere, including providing appropriate training to teachers and other workers in the public sector as the new public sector duty that he's just referred to comes into force in 2 weeks' time?
Well, I can confirm that that training is taking place, and indeed we've provided additional resources. But in the spirit of this constructive conversation, we have an extremism bill, which was in the Queen's speech, which goes further in seeking to disrupt groups that are plotting to either commit offences here in this country or indeed to travel abroad and become further radicalised. I hope the Labour Party looks seriously at that extremism bill and offers its support to this side of the House.
Hilary Benn.
It's now clear that right across the Middle East and North Africa, the common enemy is ISIL. Does the right honourable gentleman agree that our strategic objective must be to continue to bring together all of the countries affected in the region and internationally to put aside other differences and cooperate to confront ISIL?
Well, I, of course, completely agree with the right honourable gentleman, and Britain plays a leading role in bringing together the various allies that are delivering the impact against ISIL. And indeed, we have had some welcome news of prominent terrorist leaders, not necessarily in the ISIL organisation, but in other organisations, who have been killed in the last couple of days. And if those reports are correct, it's a very, very welcome step forward in the global fight against terrorism. But he's absolutely right. Ultimately, the Iraqi government and the Syrian people are going to have to find a way to take greater control of their own security. In Iraq, of course, we work with the legitimate government there. In Syria, we support the moderate opposition, and we continue to support and train them in the tasks that they undertake.
Hilary Benn.
On that subject, turning now to how we resolve the crisis, which has seen, as the right honourable gentleman will know, the largest movement of refugees since the end of the Second World War, can he tell the House what expectations he has for the new round of talks that UN Special Envoy Staffan de Mistura is holding in Geneva?
Well, first of all, of course, he's right to talk about the displaced persons, particularly in countries like Jordan and in Turkey, who are bearing an enormous burden. That is why Britain has such a massive aid contribution. And I think, again, across this House, we can be incredibly proud that the parties in the recent general election stood on a commitment to deliver 0.7% of our national income in development aid. And it is in not just a humanitarian effort, but also to make sure that we're able to help in situations like this. When it comes to burden sharing across the region, of course we want to help, but I think we have to be realistic. We cannot take large numbers of Syrian refugees into our country.
Hilary Benn.
Finally, Mr. Speaker, as more and more people gather in Libya to try and cross the Mediterranean, HMS Bulwark is doing an extraordinary job in rescuing frightened people. But we learned yesterday that its deployment is under active review. Having made a grave error last October in withdrawing support from the Mare Nostrum search and rescue operations, can the right honourable gentleman assure the House that the government will continue to save the lives of those in peril on that sea?
Well, of course, I can give him the assurance that we will continue to play our full part in the search and rescue operation in the Mediterranean. As I understand, there is essential maintenance that needs to be carried out on HMS Bulwark, which is clearly an operational issue. But no one should in any way doubt Britain's determination to play its role in helping with this situation. But can I end on this point, which in the end is this? taking people out of the water and rescuing them and their lives, of course, is absolutely essential. And we're a humanitarian nation and we need to deal with that. But in the end, you have to break the link, which enables someone to get on a boat and then claim asylum in Europe and spend the rest of their lives on the European continent. And that is the draw that draws these people who are aiming for a better life, but circumventing proper immigration controls to the European continent. And I think we should work across Europe to break that link. And I look forward to his role in helping us do that.
U.S. First Lady Michelle Obama has told pupils at a girls' school in East London that education is the ultimate key to their success.
Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? Because I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room. I rise. I rise.
The U.S. First Lady said that forced marriages, early pregnancies, and abuse remained some of the obstacles to education faced by girls around the world.
I am always in awe of what you're able to do, what you're able to push through, you know, how hungry you are for your education, that when given the tools and the opportunity, you run with it. And as I said in my remarks, I just think about how much we're losing when we don't tap into that energy. That there's 62 million girls out there who are just as bright, just as impactful potentially, just as passionate, but who have no voice, no opportunity, no resources to develop into the young women that you all will be. You know, I can just tell in the way that you carry yourselves and your confidence, the way you look me in the eye and other people, that you have what it takes inside of you. That inspires me. That makes me think through these partnerships, we can figure this out. We've got to send different messages about the importance of educating our girls. You know, our sons are important. We love men. We all do. They're good. They're useful. I have one in my life. I like him. But, you know, we have to, you know, change the definition of what it means to invest in our young girls.
Mrs. Obama said that more than 62 million girls across the world do not go to school. The visit was part of Mrs. Obama's global initiative to promote female education around the world. In the meantime, U.S. President Barack Obama and the mayor of the U.S. town of Charleston in South Carolina, Mayor Joe Raleigh, have described the shooting at an African-American church in the town as a most unspeakable tragedy.
Michelle and I know several members of Emmanuel AME Church. We knew their pastor, Reverend Clementa Pickney, who, along with 8 others, gathered in prayer and fellowship and was murdered last night. And to say our thoughts and prayers are with them and their families and their community doesn't say enough to convey the heartache and the sadness and the anger that we feel. Any death of this sort is a tragedy. Any shooting involving multiple victims is a tragedy. There is something particularly heartbreaking about a death happening in a place in which we seek solace and we seek peace, in a place of worship. Mother Emanuel is, in fact, more than a church. This is a place of worship that was founded by African Americans seeking liberty. This is a church that was burned to the ground because its worshipers worked to end slavery. When there were laws banning all black church gatherings, they conducted services in secret. When there was a nonviolent movement to bring our country closer in line with our highest ideals, some of our brightest leaders spoke and led marches from this church's steps. This is a sacred place in the history of Charleston and in the history of America. The FBI is now on the scene with local police, and more of the Bureau's best are on the way to join them. The Attorney General has announced plans for the FBI to open a hate crime investigation. We understand that the suspect is in custody, and I'll let the best of law enforcement do its work to make sure that justice is served. Until the investigation is complete, I'm necessarily constrained in terms of talking about the details of the case. But I don't need to be constrained about the emotions that tragedies like this raise. I've had to make statements like this too many times. Communities like this have had to endure tragedies like this too many times. We don't have all the facts, but we do know that, once again, innocent people were killed in part because someone who wanted to inflict harm had no trouble getting their hands on a gun. Now is the time for mourning and for healing. But let's be clear. At some point, we as a country will have to reckon with the fact that this type of mass violence does not happen in other advanced countries. It doesn't happen in other places with this kind of frequency. And it is in our power to do something about it. I say that recognizing the politics in this town foreclose a lot of those avenues right now. But it'd be wrong for us not to acknowledge it. And at some point, it's going to be important for the American people to come to grips with it. And for us to be able to shift how we think about the issue of gun violence collectively. The fact that this took place in a black church obviously also raises questions about a dark part of our history. This is not the first time that black churches have been attacked. And we know that hatred across races and faiths pose a particular threat to our democracy and our ideals. The good news is I am confident that the outpouring of unity and strength and fellowship and love across Charleston today, from all races, from all faiths, from all places of worship, indicates the degree to which those old vestiges of hatred can be overcome. That certainly was Dr. King's hope just over 50 years ago, after 4 little girls were killed in a bombing in a black church in Birmingham, Alabama. He said they lived meaningful lives and they died nobly. They say to each of us, Dr. King said, black and white alike, that we must substitute courage for caution. They say to us that we must be concerned not merely with who murdered them, but about the system, the way of life, the philosophy which produced the murderers. Their death says to us that we must work passionately and unrelentingly for the realization of the American dream. And if one will hold on, he will discover that God walks with him and that God is able to lift you from the fatigue of despair to the buoyancy of hope and transform dark and desolate valleys into sunlit paths of inner peace. Reverend Pigney and his congregation understood that spirit. Their Christian faith compelled them to reach out not just to members of their congregation or to members of their own communities, but to all in need. They opened their doors to strangers who might enter a church in search of healing or redemption. Mother Emanuel Church and its congregation have risen before, from flames, from an earthquake, from other dark times, to give hope to generations of Charlestonians. And with our prayers and our love and the buoyancy of hope, it will rise again now as a place of peace. Thank you.
9 people were shot dead at the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church by a white gunman in what the police said was a hate crime. The pastor of the church is reported to be among the dead. And with that story on the U.S. shooting, we come to the end of our news roundup for this week. Thank you for being part of it. My name is Tunde Alabi. See you again next week. Bye.